How do you start an argument between two archaeologists? Claim the Great Pyramid was built by Khufu and walk away. I know, it's not a very funny joke, but Egyptologists are not known for their sense of humour.
Is that because they all have mummy issues?
That's actually a really good one for you. Today we're looking at the absolute scandal that was the Great Graffiti Hoax, who actually built the Pyramid of Giza, and whether or not the evidence stacks up. I'm Obi, that's Tut. We're in Tut's world now. The Great Pyramid of Giza was built in the 4th dynasty by Pharaoh Khufu, also called Cheops, because when you're the king you get to call yourself whatever the hell you like, and folk just have to go with it. And how do we know this? Because in 1837 a dude called Howard Vyse had a good old nosy around the pyramid with his mate John Perring, and found a ton of ancient graffiti inside the relieving chambers with the king's name on it. And by found, I mean employed a bunch of quarrymen and a shit ton of gunpowder to blast his way in, cause why worry about a little thing like causing irreparable damage to an ancient monument?
Man, these Victorians. If they're not eating mummy powder for breakfast, stealing artifacts, and subjugating whole nations for the lols, then they ain't happy.
So they claim that this was irrefutable evidence that the pyramid was built by Khufu. Everyone agrees with the evidence, done deal, thank you, good night, end video. But nay. Because what do scholars love the most?
Tea, a good book in a dusty old library, a housekeeper called Mrs. Bustlethwaite, and some fluffy slippers?
No, well, yes. But what do they love more?
Arguing?
Arguing. So what exactly did old Howie discover? Well, he found a bunch of cartouches on the wall of the relieving chambers, those oval name places that you're familiar with. These cartouches feature variations of the name Khufu and Khnum Khufu, both associated with the 4th dynasty king who typically had 5 different names, because Pharaoh.
Was one of them K-Dog?
No, because there's definitely no evidence that Khufu was a roadman. The inscriptions were accompanied by writing identifying the various work gangs involved in the stone handling during construction, such as Friends of Khufu and The White Crown of Khnum Khufu is powerful. Vyse argued that they were workers' marks used to identify stone blocks and which work gangs had placed the blocks. He had quarrymen copy down the cartouches and the writings, plus drew some of them himself and preserved them in his handwritten journal. These graffiti marks were made in red ochre and were in places that were never meant to be seen, so not on the tomb walls or anything. And they're all over the place, so that kind of debunks a theory that Khufu just renovated somebody else's tomb.
I wouldn't mind seeing that episode of Flip or Flop.
Seems pretty good evidence that the pyramid was built by workmen employed by Khufu then, right?
The fact that this video doesn't end here tells me not.
There's a ton of folks who claim that Vyse faked the graffiti for various reasons, that he's a bad man and he should feel bad. They probably wish he stepped on a Lego, because scholars can be really mean when the tea and biscuits run out. So why are these graffiti marks fake, and why the hell would Vyse go to so much trouble in the first place? First off, to call Vyse a rotten faker is a Prussian prince called Prince Hermann Puckler Mascau. According to his 1945 book Egypt under Mehemet Ali, the prince visited the site with Vyse and reckoned the hieroglyphs were painted on afterwards. But if you read the book, the prince actually says,
"The hieroglyphics, said to have been lately discovered by Colonel Vyse in the interior of the Great Pyramid, are not carved in the stone, but only traced, as with a finger dipped in paint, and have perhaps been lately penciled on the wall."
Hermann actually visited the site before the discovery, never actually saw the hieroglyphs himself, and wasn't particularly up on his ancient Egyptian history. The man knew nothing about nothing, but decided to put his tuppence in anyway.
Bit like half the influencers on social media these days then.
Everyone pretty much accepted the graffiti as proof that the pyramid was built by Khufu for the next 150 years. It wasn't until the 1980s that the next set of critics emerged, the first being Zaccharia Sitchin. He said the graffiti must be fake because he thought the pyramid was actually made by
Aliens.
Sitchin claimed that in a report from the 1830s, Samuel Birch of the British Museum expressed concerns about the age and authenticity of the hieroglyphs in the relieving chambers. Sitchin suggested that Birch doubted the age of the cartouches and was a bit puzzled by some of the symbols. However, upon reading Birch's actual report, it becomes clear that he never said they weren't real. He just didn't get a couple of the symbols that didn't appear to be the king's name, as they weren't in a cartouche. Scholars at the time believed the king's name could only appear inside a cartouche. It was discovered later that Khufu's Horus name, Megiddo, was written in Egyptian cursive script in the same chambers as the cartouches, and that when written in cursive, didn't have to be put inside a cartouche. Let's not forget the Rosetta Stone was only decoded 10 years before Birch's report, and they still had no real idea how hieroglyphs worked. If you want to watch our video on the Rosetta Stone, I'll link it above and in the description. I think you'll really like that one. In 1983, Walter M. Allen claimed that his great-grandfather, Humphreys Brewer, a master mason, saw Vyse painting the graffiti himself.
Snitches get stitches.
According to Walter, Brewer kicked off about this, got kicked out of the pyramid, and kicked away from Egypt. Walter said that Grandad wrote letters home in 1837 about this, but researchers Martin Stowe and Jean Coburn found through meticulous research the entire story was probably made up by Walter. There's no evidence that Humphreys Brewer even wrote letters from Egypt, worked for Howard Vyse, or witnessed the forgery. Stowe and Coburn discovered that Brewer was just a tourist in Egypt in the 1840s, long after Vyse and his team had left. The name Humphrey Brewer doesn't even appear in Vyse's volumes or private journal, and you know how Victorians love to write shit down. Walter probably read Sitchin's book in the early 80s and decided to jump on the bandwagon. But why would Vyse bother to fake a bunch of graffiti in a pyramid? It wasn't for the fame. He's not exactly an Egyptologist superstar.
Is that even a thing?
He wrote some books, because Victorians love doing that, but isn't exactly well known outside the very small field. He was accused of doing it for the funding for future excavations, but he was pretty well funded anyway. He didn't need the cash. Speaking of which, do be a darling and check out the links in our description for resources on producing your own YouTube channel without being on camera. Purchasing through our links helps keep us funded, so we don't have to resort to faking ancient graffiti for the gram. He could have picked something a bit more attention-grabbing if he was faking the evidence. I mean, Carter had all that gold, boats and Tut's massive mask. You'd at least sneak in some statues or a mummified cat. Painting the equivalent of Gaz was here on the wall wouldn't have been my first choice. And we have to remember that most of his critics either knew nothing about Egyptian history or were trying to prove that the pyramids were built by little green men. In fact, Graham Hancock, author of such literary classics as Fingerprints of the Gods and Ancient Apocalypse on Netflix, changed his mind on the graffiti. Having been allowed to examine the pyramid by our old mate Zahi Hawass, he said that given some of the graffiti were in places you couldn't really get to, it's likely that they are genuine. So what do you think? Does the graffiti give us proof that the Great Pyramid was built by Khufu? Or was it just a Victorian prank by people with very questionable sense of humour? We'd love to know your thoughts. And if you liked this video, why not invite the subscribe button over for a mummy unwrapping party? But in fact it's just your Auntie Joyce covered in toilet paper. I'm Obi, you know Tut.
Thou shalt not skip leg day.
And we've been in Tut's world. See ya!